When Shaquille O'Neal walked into a private jet company near Miami International Airport in July 2004, he wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing a watch worth more than most people's houses. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or assistants or anyone who could announce to the room that this man was worth more than $250 million. He was wearing basketball shorts, a plain white t-shirt, and flip-flops. When he leaned on the marble counter and said, "Yo, what's good? I'm trying to see what y'all got. I need something fly." The woman behind the desk looked at him, looked at his clothes, listened to his slang, and made a decision. She made it in less than 5 seconds. She decided this man could not afford what she was selling. She smiled that polite little smile that people smile when they're about to dismiss you, and she slid a brochure across the counter and said, "Perhaps you'd like our charter services instead. That might be more suitable." Suitable. She said that word to a man who had earned $292 million in NBA salary alone. A man who had endorsement deals with Reebok, Pepsi, and Icy Hot. A man who owned more businesses than she had clients. She said suitable to Shaquille O'Neal because he said yo instead of hello, and wore flip-flops instead of dress shoes. And what Shaq did next became a moment that nobody in that building would ever forget. He looked at her. He looked through the glass doors at the 4 jets sitting on the tarmac. A Cessna, a Learjet, a Gulfstream, and a $33 million Dassault Falcon 900. And he said 5 words that made her pen stop moving. How much for all of them? Then he reached into the pocket of his basketball shorts, pulled out a regular checkbook, the kind your grandmother keeps in her purse, and wrote a check for $62 million, signed it, tore it out, and slid it across the counter right next to that brochure she thought was more suitable. But here's the part that will shock you. He didn't actually want the jets. He never planned to buy a single plane that day. The reason he walked into that lobby, the reason his hands were shaking before he even reached the counter, the reason he needed to prove something to someone, anyone, that afternoon had nothing to do with airplanes. It had everything to do with a phone call he received that morning, a call from someone he hadn't heard from in over 17 years, someone who broke his heart so deeply when he was a child that he spent his entire life building an armor so thick that nobody could ever make him feel powerless again. And what that person said to him in 6 words, just 6 words, will change the way you see Shaquille O'Neal forever. But I can't tell you those 6 words yet. Because to understand what they mean, you have to understand where this man came from. You have to understand the boy before the legend, the wound before the armor, the silence before the slam dunk. So watch this whole video, because this isn't just a story about a rich man and a jet. This is a story about a 2-year-old boy who was left behind by his father, a 12-year-old kid who learned to hide his pain behind jokes, and a grown man who stood in a marble lobby in flip-flops and taught a room full of people that you can never, not ever, measure someone's worth by the way they talk. And those 6 words from that phone call, they're coming, at the very end. And when you hear them, everything about this story will hit different. Let's go back to the beginning. The heat in Miami could melt your shoes right off your feet. It was a Tuesday afternoon in July 2004. The kind of day where the air itself felt like a wet blanket draped over the whole city. Palm trees stood still. Not a single leaf moved. Even the birds had gone quiet. Shaquille O'Neal had just been traded. The Los Angeles Lakers sent him to the Miami Heat. Every sports channel in America was talking about it. Shaq and Kobe Bryant, 2 of the greatest players alive, could no longer share the same locker room, the same court, the same city. Their breakup was louder than most divorces. Reporters called it the end of a dynasty. Fans picked sides. The internet exploded. But Shaq wasn't thinking about basketball right now. He was standing inside the polished marble lobby of Fontaine Executive Aviation. It was a private jet company near Miami International Airport. The floors were so shiny you could see your own reflection. The air conditioning hummed like a lullaby. Everything smelled like leather and money. Shaq was wearing basketball shorts, a plain white t-shirt, flip-flops that slapped against the marble with every step. No gold chains, no diamond earrings, no bodyguards, no crew of friends trailing behind him. Just Shaq, 7'1" and 325 pounds of man, walking up to the front desk like he was ordering a sandwich at a deli. Behind the counter sat a woman named Margot Elliston. She was 34 years old. Her blazer was pressed so sharp it could cut paper. Her glasses hung on a thin silver chain around her neck. She had been selling and leasing private jets for 6 years. She knew what money looked like. She knew how wealthy people dressed, how they spoke, how they carried themselves. And in her mind, wealthy people did not walk in wearing flip-flops. Shaq leaned on the counter. The marble groaned a little under the weight of his forearm. He flashed a wide, easy smile. The kind of smile that had made millions of people laugh on television. "Yo, what's good? I'm trying to see what y'all got. I need something fly. See, something that'll get me from the MIA to LA, without all the airport drama. You feel me?" Margot looked up at him. She saw a very tall black man in casual clothes. She heard slang. She did not see one of the most dominant athletes in the history of professional sports. She did not follow basketball. She had never watched a playoff game. She had no idea that the man standing in front of her had earned over $292 million in NBA salary alone. That number didn't even include his deals with Reebok, or Pepsi, or Icy Hot, or the dozen other companies that paid him millions just to say their name. She forced a polite smile, the kind of smile that looks friendly but isn't. "Sir, our aircraft start at around $4 million. She paused. Then she reached below the counter and pulled out a thin, glossy pamphlet. "Perhaps you'd like a brochure for our charter services instead? That might be more?" She searched for the word, found it, let it slide off her tongue like something smooth and sharp at the same time. Suitable. The word hung in the air like smoke after a candle goes out. Shaq's smile didn't fade, not on the outside. His lips stayed curved. His teeth still showed. But something behind his eyes shifted. Something old. Something heavy. Something that lived deep in his chest and had been living there since he was a little boy on a military base in Wildflecken, Germany. A place where other kids told him he was too big, too loud, too much, too different. He remembered those voices now. They sounded just like that word. Suitable. He tapped the counter twice with his massive index finger. Slow, steady, like a judge tapping a gavel. How much for everything out on that tarmac right now?" Margot blinked. Her pen stopped moving. "Excuse me?" "Everything." His voice was calm, almost soft. "Every jet you got parked outside? How much for all of them?" She almost laughed. The sound started somewhere in her throat, but it never made it past her lips, because something in his voice stopped it cold. This wasn't a joke. This man was not playing. His eyes were steady. His jaw was set. His finger was still resting on the counter like it owned the marble beneath it. The lobby went quiet. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere outside, A jet engine whined on a distant runway. And this is where the story truly begins. But here's the part nobody talks about. The part that never made the news. The part that Shaq himself didn't tell anyone for years. And the reason he walked into that lobby had nothing to do with wanting a jet. It had everything to do with a phone call he received that morning. A call from a number he didn't recognize. A voice he hadn't heard in 17 years. A voice that belonged to someone who once broke his heart so deeply that young Shaquille made a promise to himself in the dark of his bedroom. A promise that he would never, not ever, feel powerless again. Who called Shaq that morning? That answer changes everything. And you won't get it until the very end. To understand what happened in that lobby, you have to go back. Way back. Before the championships. Before the money. Before the world knew his name. March 6, 1972. Newark, New Jersey. A baby boy came into the world so big that the nurses in the delivery room gasped. His mother, Lucille O'Neill, he held him against her chest and whispered a name she had chosen weeks before. Shaquille Rashawn. In Arabic, it means little warrior. There was nothing little about him, not even then. But there was something missing, someone missing. His biological father was a man named Joseph Toney, and Joseph Toney was gone before Shaq ever opened his eyes. Gone before he took his first step. Gone before he said his first word. Just gone. Like smoke through a window screen. No goodbye, no letter, no forwarding address, no reason that a baby boy could understand. Shaq would carry that absence inside him for the rest of his life. Not on his face, not in his voice, but deep in his chest. Like a stone that never got lighter, no matter how many trophies he lifted over his head. When Shaq was 2 years old, and his mother married a man named Philip Arthur Harrison. Philip was a sergeant in the United States Army. He was strict, he was firm. He believed in discipline the way some people believe in gravity. It wasn't optional. It just was. Philip didn't hug much, but he showed up every single day. He raised Shaq on military bases across the country and across the ocean. Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. Bases in New Jersey. And then, the one that shaped Shaq the most. The Army installation in Wildflecken, Germany. Germany was hard. Shaq was the biggest kid on every playground. Not just tall, wide, thick. His shadow covered other children like a blanket. Some kids stared, some ran. Teachers watched him with narrow eyes, expecting trouble from a boy his size. Nobody asked what he was thinking. Nobody wondered what he felt. And they just looked at the outside and made up their minds. So Shaq learned to wear armor. Not the metal kind, the kind made of jokes. He figured out that if he made people laugh, they stopped being scared of him. If he talked loose and loud and goofy, people relaxed. His slang became a shield. His humor became a helmet. His personality became a suit of armor so thick that nobody could see the quiet, aching boy underneath it. It worked. People loved him. Teachers warmed up. Kids wanted to sit next to him at lunch. He was the funny kid, the loud kid, the kid who could make the whole cafeteria crack up with one sentence. But late at night, on his bunk in their small base housing apartment, Shaq would lie awake and think about Joseph Toney. He didn't think about him with anger. Not yet. Anger came later. Back then, he just thought about him with a question. Why wasn't I enough for you to stay? He never said it out loud. Not to Lucille, not to Philip, not to anyone. He buried it the way soldiers bury things, deep, clean, and with no marker so nobody could find it. But it was there. It was always there. On that base in Germany, Shaq made one real friend, a boy named Terrell Okafor. Terrell was the opposite of Shaq in almost every way. Small, quiet, thin as a pencil, Nigerian-American. His father was a staff sergeant. His mother taught English to other military families. Terrell read books the way some kids ate candy, fast, constantly, and with complete joy. He was the only kid who never flinched around Shaq. Not once. Not when Shaq accidentally knocked over a chair. Not when Shaq yelled across the playground. Not when Shaq's shadow fell across his book and blocked the sunlight. Terrell just looked up and said, "You're in my light, man. Sit down." So Shaq sat down, and they became best friends. They did everything together. Walked to school, played basketball on the cracked outdoor court behind the commissary, shared bags of Haribo gummy bears that Terrell's mother bought from the German grocery store off base. Red ones were the best. They both agreed on that without ever needing to discuss it. One afternoon, a gray, chilly German afternoon in the fall of 1984, they sat on a wooden bench outside the commissary. Shaq was 12. Terrell was 12. They were sharing gummy bears and watching soldiers walk past in their uniforms. Shaq had been quiet all day. A teacher had called him intimidating in front of the whole class that morning, and the word hit him like a slap. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. He was just big. He couldn't help being big. Terrell noticed the silence. He always noticed. "You know why people judge you, Shaq?" Shaq looked at him. "Why?" "Because judging is free. Understanding takes effort. Most people are lazy." Shaq laughed. He popped a gummy bear into his mouth and shook his head. "You sound like a little old man, bro." "I'm serious." "I know you are. That's what makes it funny." But he didn't forget those words. Not that day. Not that year. Not ever. They lodged themselves into his memory like a splinter made of gold. Tiny, sharp, and precious. A year later, Terrell's family got reassigned to another base. Just like that. 1 week, they were sharing gummy bears. The next week, Terrell was gone. A moving truck came on a Tuesday. Terrell waved from the back window of his family's car. Shaq stood on the sidewalk and waved back. He didn't cry. He was 13. 13-year-old boys on military bases don't cry. But he went to his room and sat on his bunk and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Another person. Gone. First, Joseph Tony. Now, Terrell. People leave. That was the lesson the world kept teaching Shaquille O'Neal. People leave, and you can't stop them. And there's no point in asking why, because the answer never makes it hurt less. He carried that lesson forward like a second stone next to the first one. 2 heavy things in his chest. One from a father who vanished. One from a friend who was taken away. And he kept smiling, kept joking, kept wearing the armor. Because the armor worked. The armor was strong. Now the armor let him walk into any room in the world and make people forget that behind the laughter, behind the slang, behind the 7'1" wall of personality, there was a boy who just wanted someone to stay. Now, that phone call from July 2004. The one Shaq received the morning he walked into the jet lobby. You already know it was from someone he hadn't heard from in 17 years. But was it Terrell Okafor? The boy from the bench? The boy who understood him? The boy who left in a car on a Tuesday? Or was it someone else? Someone whose absence carved the deepest wound of all? The answer is coming. But not yet. Not yet. The years moved fast after Germany. Philip Harrison got reassigned again. The family landed in San Antonio, Texas. Hot, flat, big sky. A city where high school football was a religion and basketball was its little brother. But Shaq was about to change that. Robert G. Cole High School, San Antonio. Shaq was 17 years old and already 6'10". Still growing, still getting bigger in a world that already didn't know what to do with him. But on the basketball court, his size wasn't a problem. It was a prophecy. He didn't just play basketball, he swallowed it whole. He led Cole High to a 68-1 record over 2 seasons. 68 wins, 1 loss. Teams would walk into the gym, see him standing under the rim, and you could watch the hope drain from their faces like water from a cracked bucket. College scouts came from everywhere. They sat in the bleachers with clipboards and wide eyes. They called his house at dinner time. They wrote letters. They promised everything short of the moon. Shaq chose LSU, Louisiana State University, down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The swamp, the bayou, a place where the air was thick enough to chew and the fans were louder than thunderstorms. His coach at LSU was a man named Dale Brown. And here's the thing about Dale Brown that mattered more than basketball. Dale saw the boy inside the giant. He didn't just coach Shaq's jump hook. He coached his heart. He became another father figure. One more man stepping into the space that Joseph Toney had left empty. Dale once told a reporter, "Shaquille is the most sensitive person I've ever coached. People see the size. I see the kid who just wants to be loved right." Nobody printed that quote. It wasn't exciting enough. People wanted dunks, not feelings. At LSU, Shaq averaged 21.6 points per game, so 13.5 rebounds. He was a wrecking ball wrapped in a smile. After 3 seasons, he declared for the NBA draft. June 24, 1992. Portland, Oregon. The NBA draft. The Orlando Magic selected Shaquille O'Neal with the #1 overall pick. The commissioner called his name, and Shaq walked to the stage in a dark suit, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split open. His mother was in the audience, crying. Philip was sitting next to her, back straight, jaw tight, nodding once. That single nod from Philip meant more than a standing ovation from anyone else. Shaq's rookie contract was worth $40 million over 7 years. He was 20 years old, a kid from military bases, a kid whose biological father had never once called to say, "Good game." A kid who wore armor made of jokes and slang. And now he was a millionaire. But here's what nobody reported. Here's the story that didn't make ESPN or the front page of the Orlando Sentinel. Shaq's first big paycheck landed in his bank account on a Thursday. By Friday morning, he had made 3 phone calls. The first call was to Lucille, his mother, the woman who raised him on nothing, who worked double shifts, who packed his lunches with notes that said, "I believe in you," in handwriting so neat it looked like a font. "Mama, quit your job." "Boy, what are you talking about?" "I said quit your job. I'm buying you a house. You're done working." Lucille started to argue. Shaq didn't let her finish. "You worked your whole life for me. Let me work for you now." She cried. He cried. Neither one admitted it later. The second call was to Philip, the stepfather, the sergeant, and the man who made him do push-ups when his grades dropped and run laps when he talked back. The man who showed up every single day, even though he didn't have to, even though Shaq wasn't his blood. "Phil, what kind of car you want?" "I don't need a car, Shaquille." "I didn't ask what you need. I asked what you want." Philip paused for a long time. Then, in the quietest voice Shaq had ever heard from him, the voice of a man who had never in his life asked for anything, he said, "I always liked those Mercedes." Shaq bought him one that afternoon. Black, 4 doors, leather seats that smelled like a promise kept. Then Shaq made a third stop. Not a phone call this time, a visit. He drove to a Mercedes dealership in Orlando. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. No jewelry, no entourage. No sign that he was anything other than a very tall young man out for a drive. A salesman named Douglas Kemper saw him walk in. Douglas was 46 years old, thin, red tie, hair combed to the side like a news anchor from 1987. He had been selling luxury cars for 15 years. He knew money, or at least he thought he did. Douglas looked at this enormous young black man in a t-shirt. He watched him touch the hood of a silver S-Class. He walked over with the kind of smile that says, "I'm helping you so you'll leave faster." "Can I help you, big guy? You lost?" Lost. That word again. That same invisible wall. The wall that says, "You don't belong here." The wall that doesn't have bricks or mortar. Just assumptions stacked on top of each other like a tower built from everything people think they know about you before they know a single thing. Shaq didn't flinch. He looked at Douglas Kemper the way a lion looks at a house cat. "I'll take 3. 3? Brochures? 3 cars." Douglas blinked. His smile collapsed like a folding chair. Shaq pointed. "That silver one, the black one over there, and that blue one in the corner." He paid in full. No financing, no monthly plan. 3 cars, right there, right then, cash. Douglas Kemper sold 3 Mercedes-Benz vehicles in 11 minutes and spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in the break room, staring at the wall, rethinking every assumption he had ever made about what money looks like when it walks through a door. And Shaq? He drove one of the cars off the lot, windows down, radio blasting, wearing the same jeans and t-shirt. No victory lap, no speech, no lesson delivered with a pointed finger. Just a quiet knowing. And a knowing that settled into his bones like warm water. The knowing that said, they will always see the outside first. So make the inside so strong that it doesn't matter. This became the pattern of Shaq's life. It happened at car dealerships, at jewelry stores, at restaurants where the host looked at his shorts and sneakers and seated him by the kitchen door next to the bathroom, far from the window where the real customers sat. Every single time someone looked at Shaquille O'Neal, this enormous, loud, slang-talking, flip-flop-wearing man, and decided he didn't belong. And every single time, Shaq proved them wrong. But never with anger, never with shouting, never with cruelty. He proved them wrong with his wallet, with his calm, with a silence that spoke louder than any sentence ever could. By the year 2004, Shaq had earned more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. 3 NBA championships with the Lakers, an MVP award. His face was on billboards from Los Angeles to Tokyo. His shoe deal with Reebok had made him a global icon. His estimated net worth had crossed $250 million and was still climbing. He had everything the world told him to want. But the stone in his chest was still there. It hadn't shrunk, not even a little. If anything, it had grown. Because every check he wrote, every car he bought, every stranger he surprised with generosity, none of it answered the question he'd been asking since he was 2 years old. Why wasn't I enough for you to stay? No amount of money could answer that. No championship ring could fill that silence. No jet, no fleet, no marble lobby could make a father appear where there had only ever been a ghost. And then, July 2004, the phone rang. A voice from the past. A voice connected to the deepest wound. A voice that cracked open the armor Shaq had spent 32 years building. You're still waiting to find out whose voice it was. I know. I haven't forgotten. But first, you need to meet someone else. Someone standing on the other side of that marble counter. Someone who carries her own stones, her own armor, her own story of being told she didn't belong. Because this story was never just about Shaq. It was always about what happens when two people's wounds collide in a shiny lobby on the hottest day of the year. Here's something most people never think about when they hear a story like this. And they hear that a woman at a counter judged a man by his clothes and his words. They get angry at her. They call her names. They say she's ignorant. They say she's prejudiced. They write her off the way she wrote off Shaq. And they never once stopped to ask, what made her that way? Because Margot Elliston was not born behind that counter. She was not built in a factory that produces judgmental salespeople. She was a person, a whole, breathing, complicated person with her own story, her own scars, and her own reasons for seeing the world through the narrow window she looked through. And if we're going to tell this story right, really right, we have to stand on her side of the marble for a while. Margot grew up in Metairie, Louisiana. It's a suburb just outside New Orleans. It's close enough to smell the French Quarter, but far enough to feel like a different world. Metairie was neat, organized. Lawns were mowed on Saturdays. Mailboxes were painted. People nodded at each other in the grocery store and said things like, "How's your mama doing?" even when they didn't care about the answer. Her father was a man named Claude Elliston. He flew commercial planes for Delta Airlines for 27 years. Captain Claude Elliston. That's what the neighbors called him. Not Claude. Not Mr. Elliston. Captain. Because in Metairie, what you did for a living was who you were. Her mother, Renee, taught piano lessons from the living room of their ranch-style house on Tulip Street. Every afternoon from 3 to 6, the sound of scales and stumbling sonatas drifted through the screen door and across the yard. But Margot grew up with that soundtrack, the same notes played over and over, each time a little better, each time a little closer to right. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. The kind of comfortable where you never worry about dinner, but you don't order appetizers at restaurants. The kind where your clothes are always clean and pressed, but never designer. The kind where your father's uniform hangs in the closet like a flag. Something earned, something sacred. And that uniform changed everything about how Margot saw the world. She grew up watching Claude walk through the front door in his pilot's outfit. Navy blue jacket, gold wings pinned above the breast pocket, crisp white shirt, tie knotted so perfectly it looked like it was painted on. His shoes, always polished. You could see your own face in those shoes. But when Claude wore that uniform, people respected him before he opened his mouth. Waiters called him Sir without hesitation. Bank tellers stood up straighter. Neighbors waved with both hands instead of one. And when Claude wore his weekend clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, the respect stayed, because people already knew who he was. The uniform had done its job. It had introduced him. It had said, "This man is serious. This man has value. This man belongs." Margot absorbed this lesson the way roots absorb water, slowly, completely, without knowing it was happening. She learned that appearance tells a story, that the way you dress sends a message before your mouth ever opens, that polished shoes and pressed blazers and measured words are the price of admission to rooms where decisions get made and money changes hands. Yet it wasn't a bad lesson, exactly. It was just an incomplete one, because it left no room for people who told their stories differently. People who wore flip-flops to million-dollar meetings. People who said "yo" instead of "hello." People whose value lived so far beneath the surface that you'd never find it if you only looked at the outside. Margot went to Tulane University. studied business, graduated with honors in 1993. She was smart, driven, the kind of student who sat in the front row and highlighted her textbooks in 3 different colors: yellow for facts, blue for concepts, pink for things she disagreed with. After college, she didn't know what she wanted to do. She just knew it had to involve airplanes, because airplanes meant her father, and her father meant safety. And safety meant everything to a girl who had watched her mother's hands shake every time Claude flew through a thunderstorm and didn't call when he landed. In 1998, she got a job at Fontaine Executive Aviation in Miami. She started as an office assistant, filing papers, answering phones, making coffee so strong it could wake up a statue. Within 2 years, she was on the sales floor. Within 4, she was the top seller in the company. She was good at her job because she understood people. Or at least, she understood a certain kind of people. The kind who wore suits, the kind who spoke carefully, the kind who reminded her of Claude. Her boss was a man named Vincent Trudeau. He was 51, French-Canadian, silver-haired, and had the kind of calm authority that made you lower your voice when he walked into a room. Vincent trusted Margot, and he gave her the biggest clients. He let her run the showroom floor on days when he was traveling. He never told her about her blind spot. Maybe he didn't see it. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he figured she'd learn on her own, the way everyone learns the lessons that matter most. The hard way, at the worst possible time. Because Margot had a blind spot the size of a Gulfstream jet. She believed, deep down, in the place where beliefs live before you even know they're there, that wealth had a dress code, that money spoke a certain way, that if someone walked into her lobby using slang and wearing basketball shorts, the math simply didn't work. The equation didn't balance. The uniform was wrong, so the person must be wrong too. She didn't think of it as prejudice. She thought of it as experience. She thought she was reading the room, and she thought she was being efficient, saving time, saving energy, saving the company the awkwardness of showing a $12 million aircraft to someone who couldn't afford the fuel. She was wrong, but she didn't know it yet. Now, here's the part that makes this story deeper than a simple lesson about judging books by covers. Margot had been on the other side of that counter once. She knew exactly what it felt like to be measured by your appearance and found lacking. It was 1996. She was 26 years old. She walked into First National Bank of New Orleans wearing a yellow sundress and sandals. Her hair was down. No blazer. No briefcase. She looked like a woman on her way to brunch, not a woman about to ask for a $60,000 small business loan. The loan officer was a man named Gerald Whitfield. He was 53, a gray mustache, reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked at Margot the way you look at a child who wanders into the wrong classroom. "Sweetheart," he said, and that word, sweetheart, landed on her like a brick. "These applications are complicated. Maybe you'd like to come back with your husband or your father." She didn't have a husband. She didn't need her father. She had a business plan, a credit score of 740, and a fury in her chest so hot it could have powered the entire city of New Orleans for a week. She got the loan, not from Gerald, from a different bank 3 weeks later, where a woman named Patricia looked at her sundress and said, "Love the color. Now let's talk numbers." Margot never forgot how Gerald made her feel. Small, stupid. Like she was a child playing dress-up in an adult's world. She carried that feeling with her for years. It made her work harder, dress sharper, speak more carefully. It made her iron her blazers until they could stand up on their own. But it also did something she never expected. It didn't make her more compassionate. It made her more rigid. Because instead of learning that appearances can be deceiving, instead of learning that the woman in the sundress might be the smartest person in the room, she learned the opposite lesson. She learned that if Gerald judged her for looking casual, then looking casual must be the problem. She learned that the world rewards the uniform, so she wore the uniform every day, without exception, and she expected everyone else to wear it too. That's why she offered Shaq the charter brochure, not because she was evil, not because she was heartless, but because she was hurt. Because a man named Gerald had taught her that the world sorts people by their surfaces, and instead of fighting that system, she joined it. The saddest part? If you had told Margot this, if you had sat her down and explained that she was doing to Shaq exactly what Gerald did to her, she would have been horrified. She would have cried. She would have denied it at first, and then she would have gone quiet. And then she would have seen it. Because she wasn't blind. She was just wearing blinders she didn't know she'd put on. But nobody told her. Not until a 7'1" man in flip-flops pulled out a checkbook and rearranged her entire understanding of who deserves respect. Now here's one more thing you need to know about that afternoon in July 2004. One detail that changes the shape of everything. So when Shaq walked into that lobby, Margot wasn't the only person working at Fontaine Executive Aviation that day. There was someone else in the building, in the back office, behind a closed door. A man who had flown into Miami from Atlanta that very morning. He wasn't there to buy a jet. He wasn't there to sell one. He was there because he'd read in the Miami Herald that Shaquille O'Neal had just been traded to the Heat. And something about that headline, something old, something as old as a bench outside a German commissary, pulled him out of his chair, into his car, and onto a plane heading south. He didn't know Shaq would walk into that same building. He didn't plan it. He didn't arrange it. Some things in life aren't planned. They're pulled. By gravity. By memory. By the invisible thread that connects two people who once shared a bag of gummy bears and told each other the truth. His name was Terrell Okafor, and he was sitting 15 feet away, behind a thin wooden door, listening to every single word. The lobby air felt different now, heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. Margot stood behind the counter, her fingers resting on the edge of the marble. Her nails were painted a pale pink, the color of calm, the color of control. But her hands were not calm. They were doing that thing hands do when the brain is trying to catch up to what the eyes just heard. They were trembling. Shaq stood on the other side of the counter. His question still hung in the air between them like a fastball frozen in midair. How much for everything out on that tarmac right now? Margot swallowed. She glanced through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows behind her, the ones that looked out over the private tarmac, the ones that gave clients their first glimpse of what $60 million looks like when it's parked in a row under the Miami sun. 4 aircraft sat out there, gleaming, patient, beautiful in that cold, expensive way that machines can be beautiful when humans pour enough money into them. A Cessna Citation X, sleek, fast. The kind of jet that tech executives bought when they wanted to get from San Francisco to New York faster than anyone else, worth around $8 million. A Learjet 60, smaller, punchy. The sports car of the sky, worth about $6 million. A Gulfstream 4, big, elegant, long range. The kind of plane that could cross an ocean without stopping for fuel. Worth roughly $13 million. Diane the Crown Jewel. A Dassault Falcon 900. Triple engine, French-made. Freshly detailed that morning by a ground crew that spent 4 hours polishing every inch of its pearl-white body. Worth approximately $33 million. Margot did the math in her head. She was good at math. She'd always been good at math. Numbers were clean. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't show up in flip-flops and confuse you. "Sir," she said carefully, "the combined value of those aircraft would be in excess of $60 million. She said it the way you might tell someone the ocean is deep. A fact meant to create distance. A number meant to build a wall so tall that the conversation would have no choice but to turn around and walk away." Shaq nodded, slowly. The way a man nods when he already knows the answer to the question he asked. Then he reached into the pocket of his basketball shorts. Not his back pocket, not a jacket pocket, not a leather briefcase or a designer wallet. The side pocket of a pair of shorts that probably cost $12 at a sporting goods store. He pulled out a checkbook. It was a regular checkbook. The kind you get from your bank in a plain blue vinyl cover. The kind your grandmother keeps in her purse next to the tissues and the butterscotch candies. Nothing fancy, nothing gold-plated, nothing that screamed wealth or power or status, just a checkbook. Margot stared at it, her mouth opened slightly. Not enough for words, just enough for disbelief to leak out. Shaq clicked a pen, a basic ballpoint, black ink. He pressed the pen to the paper and began to write. The sound was small, almost nothing. Pen on paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. But in that silent lobby, with the air conditioning humming and the jets gleaming outside, and the sun pressing against the windows like it wanted to come in and watch, that sound was the loudest thing in the world. He wrote the date, July 2004. He wrote the name, Fontaine Executive Aviation. He wrote the amount, first in numbers, then in words, on the line below, the way they teach you in school, the way your mother shows you when you open your first checking account, and she says, "Always write the amount in words too, baby." Numbers can be changed. Words can't. He tore the check free. The perforation made a soft, ripping sound, like tearing a page from a story that was never supposed to be written. He placed the check on the marble counter. He slid it forward with one finger. The same finger that had tapped the counter earlier, or the same finger that had wagged at defenders on a basketball court. The same finger that had pointed at his mother's new house and said, "This is yours now." Margot looked down. The check was made out for $62 million. 62 million. The extra $2 million was for taxes, because Shaq knew about taxes. Because Shaq, despite the slang and the shorts and the flip-flops, had a business mind sharper than most Fortune 500 CEOs. He owned franchises, Auntie Anne's, Five Guys, Papa John's. He had invested in tech companies, real estate, and media ventures. He had financial advisors, accountants, and lawyers on speed dial. He wasn't some reckless athlete blowing money on impulse. He was a man who understood exactly what $62 million meant, exactly what it could do, and exactly how much would be left after it was gone. And he had written that check on purpose. Every zero, every letter, on purpose. Margot's eyes moved from the number to the signature line. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal. The name sat there on the paper like a sentence at the end of an argument. Final. Complete. Unanswerable. Her face changed color, not red. White. The blood drained from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Her hands, which had been trembling slightly before, were now shaking so hard that she pressed them flat against the counter to make them stop. She looked up at Shaq. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time since he walked through the door. She saw the flip-flops, the basketball shorts, the plain white t-shirt, the same outfit she had used to calculate his worth 10 minutes ago. But now she saw something else, too. She saw the steadiness in his eyes, and the calm in his jaw, the way he stood, not aggressive, not angry, not puffed up with ego, but rooted, like a tree that had been growing in the same spot for 100 years and knew exactly how deep its roots went. That should cover everything outside plus the tax, yeah? Shaq said. His voice was calm, soft almost, the voice of a man who had nothing to prove and everything to teach. Margot opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a woman trying to breathe underwater. Mr. O'Neill, You know my name now? It wasn't a cruel question. There was no venom in it, no gotcha. If anything, there was sadness in it. The sadness of a man who had walked through this exact moment so many times that he could script it in his sleep. Walk in, get judged, prove them wrong, walk out, repeat. He was tired of the cycle, but he didn't know any other way to break it. Margot's eyes filled with water. Not a flood, not dramatic movie-style tears, just a slow, quiet rising, like a tide coming in when nobody's watching the shore. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. And here's where the story does something that nobody expected. Not Margot, not the security guard sitting by the door pretending to read a magazine. Not Rosalind Asante, the aircraft mechanic who had just walked in from the tarmac with grease on her hands and stopped dead in her tracks when she felt the weight of the room. Shaq picked up the check. He folded it once, then twice. Neat, careful folds. The way you fold a letter you've written but decided not to send. He slid it back into the pocket of his basketball shorts. "I don't need your planes," he said quietly. I didn't come here to buy a fleet." Margot blinked. A tear broke free and slid down her right cheek. She didn't wipe it. "Then, why?" "I need you to remember this moment." He said it without raising his voice, without pointing, without any of the showmanship the world associated with Shaquille O'Neal. This wasn't the Shaq who did goofy interviews. This wasn't the Shaq who rapped on albums, or starred in movies, or danced on television. This was the other one, the one underneath, the boy from Newark, the kid from Wildflecken, the son who was left. Next time somebody walks through that door who doesn't look like your idea of rich, you treat them like they could buy this whole building. Because maybe they can. He paused. Let the words settle. And even if they can't, even if they're broke, even if they're just dreaming, even if they walked in off the street because the air conditioning looked nice, you treat them like a person. Because that's free. And it's the only thing in this building that's worth anything. The lobby was silent. The air conditioning hummed. The jets sat outside like monuments. The marble floor reflected everything. The lights, the windows, the two people standing on either side of a counter that suddenly felt like the thinnest wall in the world. Margot's hands had stopped shaking. Something had shifted inside her. Not a small shift. The big kind. The kind that rearranges furniture in a room you thought you knew by heart. She wasn't thinking about the check anymore. She was thinking about Gerald Whitfield, the loan officer, the gray mustache, the word sweetheart, the sundress, the way she had felt. Small, dismissed, invisible, sitting in that bank chair at 26 years old. She had carried that feeling for 8 years. She had let it harden inside her like cement. And instead of using it to build empathy, instead of saying, "I know what it feels like to be judged, so I will never do it to someone else," She had used it to build a wall that said, "Dress right, speak right, look the part, or I will assume you don't belong." She had become Gerald. The realization hit her like a wave she didn't see coming. The kind that knocks you off your feet not because it's big, but because you weren't braced for it. "You're right," she said. Her voice was quiet, but steady now. The way a voice sounds when it's done, pretending. "You're absolutely right." Shaq looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that doesn't judge. The kind of look that says, "I see you. All of you. Even the parts you're ashamed of." Then he smiled. The real smile. Not the armor smile. Not the TV smile. Not the smile that performs for cameras and crowds and reporters with microphones. The real one. The one that starts in the eyes and works its way down to the mouth like sunshine creeping across a floor. "We're good," he said, "but I am going to need to look at that Gulf Stream. For real this time." Margot laughed. It came out before she could stop it. A short, surprised sound like a hiccup made of relief. Shaq laughed too. And Rosalind, standing by the tarmac door with grease-stained hands and wide eyes, let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It was the kind of laughter that comes after something breaks open inside you. Not the funny kind. The healing kind. And the kind that says, something just changed, and it's never going back to the way it was. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's everything. Margot came around the counter. She didn't grab a brochure. She didn't check his credit. She walked beside him toward the glass doors like she was walking with a friend. "The Gulf Stream 4 is this way, Mr. O'Neill. And if you want, I can have Rosalind walk you through the full specs. She knows those engines better than the people who built them." "Bet," Shaq said. "Let's do it." They walked toward the tarmac together. The afternoon sun poured through the glass and painted long golden rectangles on the marble floor. And behind them, behind the counter, behind the lobby, behind a thin wooden door that led to a small back office filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old coffee, a man sat in a rolling chair with his hand pressed over his mouth. His name was Terrell Okafor. He had heard everything, every word, every silence, every fold of that check. And he was crying. Not because of the money, not because of the jets, not because a famous athlete had just proven a point with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. He was crying because Shaq had stood in that lobby and spoken in the same voice he'd used on a playground in Germany 20 years ago. The same slang, the same rhythm, the same unapologetic, unedited, unpolished version of himself. The world had told Shaq to change, to smooth out the edges, to speak properly, to dress the part, to wear the uniform. And Shaq had said no, not loudly, not angrily, just no. And Terrell? Terrell had said yes. He had changed everything. His accent, his vocabulary, his posture, his clothes. He had spent 19 years sanding himself down until he fit perfectly into every room he entered. And he did fit, perfectly, smoothly, invisibly. But fitting in and belonging are not the same thing. Fitting in means shaping yourself to match the room. Belonging means the room makes space for your shape. Shaq belonged everywhere he went. Not because of his money, because of his refusal to be anyone other than who he was. Terrell sat in that back office and felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that had been locked so tight for so long that he'd forgotten there was anything behind it. He wiped his eyes. He straightened his wire-rimmed glasses. He stood up, and he opened the door. Terrell stood in the doorway. The lobby stretched out in front of him, all marble and glass and light. The front counter was empty now, Margot's pen sat on a stack of papers, abandoned. The brochure she had offered Shaq was still lying on the counter, untouched, like a small monument to a mistake that would never be made again. Through the glass doors, Terrell could see the tarmac, the jets, the sun, and two figures walking side by side, one enormous, one small, toward the Gulf Stream 4 that sat gleaming like a white cathedral on wheels. Shaq and Rosalind. Terrell didn't follow. Not yet. His legs felt like they were made of wet sand. His heart was beating in a way that didn't make medical sense. Too fast and too slow at the same time, like it couldn't decide whether to sprint or stop entirely. He stood there, watching through the glass, watching his childhood best friend walk across a tarmac in flip-flops, talking with his hands the way he always did, laughing at something the mechanic said, and looking exactly, impossibly, perfectly like the same kid who once sat on a bench in Germany and ate gummy bears like the world was simple and good. 19 years. 19 years since Terrell had waved goodbye from the back window of his father's car. 19 years since the military had decided that Staff Sergeant Emmanuel Okafor was needed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina instead of Wildflecken, Germany. 19 years since a friendship that felt as permanent as gravity was snapped in half by a transfer order signed by someone who had never met either boy and would never know what he took from them. Terrell had thought about calling, many times. No, in high school, when he was the new kid in Fayetteville, North Carolina, eating lunch alone in a cafeteria where nobody knew his name. In college, at Howard University in Washington, D.C., when he was studying finance and feeling like the only person in the room who didn't know the rules to a game everyone else had been playing since birth. In his 20s, when he landed his first job at a brokerage firm in Atlanta and realized that the rules of the game were simple but brutal. Sound right, look right, be right, or be invisible. He never called. Because the longer you wait, the heavier the phone gets. And after a while, the wait becomes the excuse. It's been too long. He won't remember me. He's famous now. Why would he want to hear from some kid he knew in Germany? But Terrell followed Shaq's career the way a man follows a lighthouse, so from a distance, in the dark, with the constant, quiet knowledge that the light is there even when you can't reach it. He watched every game he could find on television. He watched Shaq dominate at LSU, watched him get drafted number 1, watched him dunk so hard in Orlando that he literally pulled the shot clock off the backboard. The whole structure came crashing down like the building itself couldn't contain him. Watched him win championships in Los Angeles. Watched him feud with Kobe. Watched him give interviews where reporters tried to bait him, and Shaq just laughed and answered in slang so thick you needed subtitles. And every single time, every game, every interview, every press conference, Terrell noticed the same thing. Shaq never changed his voice. The whole world was watching. Millions of people, corporate sponsors, network executives, Hall of Fame voters, and Shaq spoke the same way he spoke on that playground in Wildflecken. The same way he spoke to 12-year-old Terrell over a bag of Haribo gummy bears. Terrell would sit in his living room in Buckhead, a nice neighborhood in Atlanta, a neighborhood where the houses had columns and the driveways were paved, and the neighbors' dogs had better health insurance than most Americans, and he would watch Shaq on TV and feel two things at the same time: admiration and envy. Admiration because Shaq was brave, because refusing to change your voice in a world that rewards conformity is one of the bravest things a person can do. Because every time Shaq said "yo" or "for real" or "you feel me" on national television, he was telling every kid who sounded like him that their voice was valid and that their words had worth. that they didn't need to trade their tongue for a ticket. And envy. Deep, quiet, shameful envy. Because Terrell had done the opposite. Terrell had traded. It started small. In high school in Fayetteville. His family had moved from Germany to North Carolina, and the kids in his new school heard two things in his voice: a Nigerian accent underneath and military slang on top. Neither one fit. Neither one opened doors. So Terrell started adjusting. A word here, a phrase there. He dropped the slang first. What's good became, how are you? That's fire became, that's impressive. Yo became, excuse me. Each word he replaced felt like pulling a tooth. Painful the first time, then numb, then forgotten. The accent went next. He practiced in his bedroom mirror at night, watching his mouth, shaping vowels, flattening consonants. His mother, Adize, heard him one evening through the door and knocked softly. "Terrell, who are you talking to?" "Nobody, Mama. Just practicing." "Practicing what?" He didn't answer, because the truth was too embarrassing to say out loud. Practicing how to not sound like me. By the time he got to Howard University, the transformation was complete. Terrell Okafor spoke like a news anchor, measured, polished, every syllable placed with surgical precision. His professors praised him. His classmates respected him. Recruiters from finance firms heard him speak and wrote articulate in the notes column of their evaluation forms. Articulate. That word followed Terrell like a shadow with teeth. Every performance review, every client meeting, every networking event where a white colleague would introduce him by saying, "Dirt, this is Terrell. He's very articulate." As if clear speech from a black man was a magic trick. As if grammar from a Nigerian-American mouth was a surprise worth commenting on. Like a dog walking on its hind legs. And Terrell smiled every time. He said, "Thank you." He adjusted his tie. He sipped his water. He performed gratitude for a compliment that was never really a compliment. It was a measurement. It was a sorting tool. It said, "You pass, you sound like us, you may enter." By 2004, Terrell was 32 years old. He was an investment banker at a mid-level firm called Greystone Capital Partners. He made good money. He drove a BMW, silver, clean, always washed on Sundays. He lived in a two-bedroom condo in Buckhead, with hardwood floors and a kitchen he rarely used because he worked 70 hours a week. From the outside, he had made it. From the inside, he was hollow. Because somewhere along the way, the boy who read books on military base benches had disappeared. The boy who told Shaq that judging is free but understanding takes effort. That boy was gone. Replaced by a man who understood the system so well that he had become the system. A man who wore the uniform so perfectly that he had forgotten what his own skin felt like underneath it. He was exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixes. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that comes from pretending to be someone else for so long that you can't remember who you were before the performance started. And then, one morning in July 2004, Terrell was sitting at his desk at Greystone Capital. It was 7:30 in the morning. The office was mostly empty, and he was drinking black coffee from a mug that said, "Excellence is a habit," a mug the company gave everyone at the Christmas party like a command disguised as a gift. He opened the Miami Herald's website. He always checked Miami news because his mother had retired there 2 years earlier. Adize Okafor, now 61, lived in a small apartment in North Miami Beach, taught Sunday school at a Nigerian church, and called Terrell every Wednesday night to ask why he wasn't married yet. The headline hit him like a gust of wind. Shaq traded to Miami Heat in blockbuster deal. There was a photo. Shaq at a press conference, grinning, holding up a Miami Heat jersey with the number 32 on it, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000, but still somehow looking like a man who would rather be in basketball shorts. And Terrell stared at that photo for a long time. Long enough for his coffee to go cold. Long enough for two co-workers to walk past his office and not notice him because Terrell was the kind of man people walked past. Polished, quiet, blending in so well that he was practically furniture. He stared at the photo and thought about gummy bears. He thought about the bench, the gray German sky, the commissary, the sound of soldiers' boots on concrete, the way Shaq's laugh used to bounce off the buildings like a ball thrown too hard. And he felt something. Something he hadn't felt in years, maybe decades. He felt homesick, not for Germany, not for a place, for a person, for the version of himself that existed only when he was sitting next to Shaquille O'Neal on a wooden bench, being exactly who he was without apology or adjustment. And he wanted to go back to that bench. He wanted to sit down. He wanted to say yo without thinking about it. He wanted to eat a red gummy bear and not have to perform anything for anyone. Before he fully understood what he was doing, Terrell was on the phone. He called his assistant, told her he needed to take a personal day. She sounded surprised. Terrell had never taken a personal day, not once in 4 years. Is everything okay, Terrell? Yeah, I just need to handle something. He booked a flight to Miami. Delta, his seat was in business class, because he always flew business class, because that's what people at his level did. He landed at Miami International Airport at 1:15 in the afternoon. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know where Shaq was. He didn't know how to find him. He just knew he needed to be in the same city, to breathe the same air. And maybe, if the universe was kind, if the thread that connected them hadn't rotted away after 19 years, maybe find a way to say hello. He rented a car. He drove aimlessly for a while. He passed the American Airlines arena where the Heat played. He drove through South Beach. He stopped at a gas station and bought a bag of Haribo gummy bears. He ate 3 red ones in the parking lot and almost cried. Then he drove past a building near the airport. Fontaine Executive Aviation. The sign was elegant, tasteful, the kind of place that whispered money instead of shouting it. He didn't know why he pulled in. He told himself it was because the parking lot looked cool and shaded, and he needed to think. But that wasn't it. Not really. He pulled in because of the jets. Because jets meant movement. And movement felt like the opposite of the paralysis that had been gripping his life for years. He walked inside. The lobby was empty except for a woman behind the counter. Blazer, glasses on a chain, pink nails. Margot. He didn't know her name yet. She greeted him politely. He asked, in his careful, measured voice, if he could sit in the waiting area for a few minutes. Cool off. Make some calls. Of course, sir. Help yourself to the water and the magazines. She didn't offer him a brochure. She didn't redirect him to charter services. Because Terrell was wearing a tailored suit. Because Terrell spoke in clean corporate English. Because Terrell had spent 19 years making sure that people like Margot would never look at him the way she was about to look at Shaq. He passed her test. And passing it had never felt worse. And he wandered into the back office, found an empty chair, sat down, started scrolling through his phone, looking for any clue about where Shaq might be today. Any event, any appearance, any sighting. And then the front door opened, and a voice filled the lobby like sunlight fills a room when you pull the curtains back. Yo, what's good? I'm trying to see what y'all got. Terrell's phone slipped from his hand, and landed face down on the carpet. He knew that voice. He would know that voice in a crowd of 10,000. He would know it underwater. He would know it in a dream. He stood up. He moved to the door. He pressed his ear against it. His hands were shaking, not the polished, controlled hands of a Greystone capital investment banker, but the trembling hands of a 12-year-old boy who just heard his best friend's voice after believing he might never hear it again. And then he heard what Margot said, and what Shaq said back, and the sound of a check being written, and the lesson delivered in a voice so calm it could have been a prayer. Next time somebody walks through that door who doesn't look like your idea of rich, you treat them like they could buy this whole building. Terrell slid down the wall, his back against the door, his knees pulled up to his chest. His tie, a silk Hermes tie he had bought to celebrate his last promotion, pressed against his chin. And he cried. He cried for the accent he had buried, for the slang he had killed, for the boy who used to say, "Yo," and "That's fire," and "You feel me," the boy who sounded like himself and never once thought that was something to be ashamed of. He cried because Shaq had kept what Terrell had thrown away. And now, right now, Terrell was standing in the doorway. The lobby behind him, the tarmac ahead. His best friend 15 yards away, standing next to a Gulfstream jet, talking to an aircraft mechanic named Rosalind like it was the most normal Tuesday in the world. Terrell took one step, then another. His expensive shoes clicked on the marble, then on the concrete of the breezeway, then on the hot asphalt of the tarmac. The Miami sun hit him like a wall. His suit immediately felt like a furnace. Sweat formed on his forehead. His glasses fogged for a second and then cleared. Now Shaq was standing with his back to the lobby. Rosalind was pointing at something on the underside of the Gulfstream's wing. She was explaining engine mounts. Shaq was nodding, asking questions, genuinely interested. Because Shaq was genuinely interested in everything. Always had been, always would be. Terrell stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to run if his courage failed. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. Still, nothing. 19 years of silence had rusted the hinges of this particular door. Rosalind noticed him first. She looked past Shaq's shoulder and saw a man in a suit standing on the tarmac, looking like he had just seen a ghost. Or maybe like he was the ghost, finally appearing after being invisible for 2 decades. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. Shaq turned around. And 2 pairs of eyes met across 6 feet of hot tarmac. Shaq saw a man in a tailored suit, wire-rimmed glasses, clean-shaven. Standing with a slight pigeon-toed stance, weight shifted to his left foot. The suit was unfamiliar. The glasses were new. The clean-shaven face was different from the chubby-cheeked kid he remembered. But the stance, the pigeon toes, the left foot thing. Some things the body never forgets, even when the mind does. Shaq's brow furrowed, his head tilted, his mouth opened slightly. And then, like a lock clicking open, like a light turning on in a room that had been dark for 19 years, recognition flooded his face. "Terrell?" It came out as a whisper, which was strange, because Shaquille O'Neal had never whispered anything in his life. He was the loudest man in every room, the biggest voice on every court, in the man whose laugh could be heard from 3 blocks away. But he whispered this name, because some names are too sacred to shout. Some names belong to a part of your life so tender that you can only touch it gently, or it breaks. "Terrell, is that? Bro, is that you?" Terrell's eyes were already wet. His chin was already trembling. His expensive suit was already darkening with sweat under the Miami sun. He nodded. Yeah, Shaq. His voice cracked on the second word, cracked right down the middle like a plate dropped on a kitchen floor. It's me. Shaq didn't speak, didn't move. For one full second, the longest second in the history of seconds, he just stood there, looking at this man who used to be a boy, who used to be his best friend, who used to share gummy bears on a bench in a country that felt like 1,000,000 years ago. See, and then Shaq moved. He closed the 6 feet in 2 steps, 2 massive, floor-shaking steps, and he wrapped his arms around Terrell Okafor and lifted him off the ground. Not a handshake, not a pat on the back, not a cool guy head nod. A hug. The kind of hug that has weight. The kind that says every single thing that 19 years of silence couldn't. Terrell's feet dangled 6 inches off the tarmac. His glasses went crooked. His arms that spent their days reaching for spreadsheets and coffee mugs and the next rung of a corporate ladder, wrapped around Shaq's massive neck and held on. Rosalind stepped back quietly. She looked away. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because it was private. Because some moments belong only to the people inside them. Shaq set Terrell down after 15 seconds, but he didn't let go of his shoulders. "Where'd you been, man?" Shaq's voice was thick, hoarse, the voice of a man fighting to keep the water behind the dam. "Where you been?" Terrell looked up at his friend, the friend who never changed his voice, the friend who stood in a lobby and wrote a check for $62 million rather than shrink. The friend who was still, somehow, miraculously, stubbornly, beautifully himself. "I got lost, Shaq." Terrell's voice was barely a whisper now. "I got real lost." Shaq squeezed his shoulders, looked him dead in the eyes, and said the simplest, truest, most important thing either of them had heard in 19 years. "Well, you're here now." And in that moment, on that tarmac, under a sun that didn't care about money or jets or how you talked or what you wore, 2 boys from a military base in Germany found each other again. The world kept spinning. The jets kept gleaming. Somewhere inside, Margot was sitting at her counter, rewriting a policy she hadn't known she needed. Somewhere in Newark, a man named Joseph Toney was sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment with a phone in his hand, wondering if his son would ever call back. But right here, right now, on this tarmac, 2 friends, reunited, and neither one of them was letting go. Rosalind Asante didn't say a word. She just moved, quietly, efficiently, the way she did everything. She walked into the maintenance hangar, past the tool racks and hydraulic lifts, and the smell of engine oil that she loved more than perfume, and she grabbed 2 folding chairs, and the metal kind. The kind with the plastic seats that stick to your legs when it's hot. The kind that cost $9 at a hardware store and have no business being part of a moment this important. She carried them out to the tarmac, set them down in the narrow strip of shade cast by the Gulf Stream's wing, positioned them facing each other, about 3 feet apart, close enough to talk, far enough to breathe. Then she walked back inside without a word. Because Rosalind understood something that most people don't. She understood that sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for someone is disappear. Give them space. Give them shade. Give them 2 cheap chairs and the dignity of privacy. Shaq looked at the chairs, looked at the hangar door closing behind Rosalind, looked back at Terrell. "She's good people," Shaq said. Yeah," Terrell said. "She is." They sat down. The chairs groaned under Shaq's weight. Terrell's chair was silent. They were quiet for a while, a full minute, maybe longer. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full. Full of everything that needs to be said, but hasn't found its words yet. The Miami sun was beginning its slow slide toward the horizon. The light was changing, shifting from the hard white glare of afternoon to something softer, warmer, the color of honey, the color of memory. A plane took off on a distant runway. The sound started as a whisper and grew into a roar and then faded back to nothing, like a sentence the sky started but decided not to finish. Then Shaq reached into the back pocket of his basketball shorts and pulled something out. A bag of Haribo gummy bears. It was crumpled and warm from being pressed against his body all day. The plastic was slightly fogged with heat, but the bears inside were intact. Red ones, yellow ones, green ones, white ones, orange ones, tumbled together like a tiny crowd at a tiny concert. Terrell saw the bag, and his face did something complicated. It tried to laugh and cry at the same time. It settled somewhere in between, a trembling smile that looked like sunrise through rain. "No way," he said. "Every day, bro." Shaq held the bag up like a trophy, like a championship ring, like the most valuable thing he owned, which in this moment it was. Every single day. Never stopped. "You're lying." "I swear on my mama. Ask anyone. Ask my teammates. Ask D-Wade. I keep a bag in my locker, in my car, in my kitchen. I got a drawer at home that's nothing but gummy bears. Lucille thinks I'm crazy." "You are crazy." "Maybe, but I never forgot, man. I never forgot the bench." Terrell took the bag from Shaq's hands. He opened it carefully. The way you open something that isn't just candy. The way you open a letter from someone you love. The way you open a door you've been standing behind for 19 years. He poured a few into his palm, picked out a red one, held it up between his thumb and forefinger like a jeweler examining a stone. "Red ones are still the best," he said. "Facts," Shaq said. "That has never changed. That will never change. Some things are just true forever." They ate gummy bears in silence for a while, chewing slowly, tasting sugar and gelatin and 19 years of distance dissolving one bear at a time. Then Terrell started talking. He didn't plan to. And he didn't rehearse it on the flight from Atlanta. He didn't outline it the way he outlined presentations at Greystone Capital, bullet points, supporting data, anticipated objections, proposed solutions. This wasn't a presentation. This was a confession. "I changed my voice, Shaq." He said it looking at the tarmac, at the shimmering heat rising off the asphalt like the ground was exhaling. "What do you mean?" Shaq asked, but his tone said he already understood. "I mean, I changed it. All of it. The way I talk, the words I use, the way I sound. I killed it. I killed my own voice, and I replaced it with something that would make white people in boardrooms feel comfortable." He told Shaq everything. About Fayetteville, about the kids who heard his accent and his slang and decided he was foreign and ghetto at the same time, which was a special kind of loneliness. Too African for the Americans, too American for the Africans, too military for the civilians, too civilian for the military. About Howard, about the mirror, about practicing vowels at night while his mother listened through the door and said nothing because she didn't know how to tell her son that the voice he was erasing was the voice she had given him, and erasing it felt like erasing her. About Greystone Capital, about the tie, about the BMW, about the Buckhead condo with the hardwood floors and the kitchen he never used, about the word articulate that followed him through every room like a dog he never asked for and couldn't shake off, about the performance, the exhausting, endless, soul-flattening performance of being Terrell Okafor, acceptable version, the version that got promoted, the version that got invited to dinners, the version that made partners at the firm say, "He's one of the good ones," when they thought he couldn't hear. "One of the good ones," Terrell repeated. He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that has a knife inside it. "You know what that means, right? It means the rest of us, the ones who sound like you, who talk like you, they're the bad ones. I'm only good because I stopped sounding like where I came from." Shaq didn't interrupt. He didn't nod along or offer quick comfort. He just listened. His massive frame was still. His eyes were focused. His hands rested on his knees like two anchors holding him to the moment. This was the Shaq that cameras never captured. Not the goofball who made funny faces on TNTs inside the NBA. Not the rapper who made albums. But not the guy in the icy hot commercials rubbing cream on his shoulder with a goofy grin. This was the other Shaq, the real one. The one who sat in therapy with Dr. Celeste Woodard in Los Angeles and talked about abandonment and identity and the difference between being loved and being seen. The one who earned a doctoral degree in education from Barry University. Not for the fame, not for the credential, but because he believed that learning was the one thing nobody could repossess. They could take your contract, they could trade you, they could leave you, but they couldn't unlearn what you learned. This Shaq, Dr. Shaquille O'Neal, sat in a folding chair on a hot tarmac and held space for his friend the way Dr. Woodard had held space for him. Without judgment, without advice. See, without the compulsive need to fix what might just need to be witnessed. When Terrell finished, he was breathing hard, like he had run a race. His suit jacket was dark with sweat. His tie was loose. His glasses had slid down his nose. He looked nothing like the polished investment banker who had walked into Fontaine Aviation 4 hours ago. He looked like Terrell. Shaq was quiet for a long time. The sun had dropped another inch toward the horizon. The shadow of the Gulf Stream's wing had stretched across both chairs now, covering them like a canopy, like the wing was trying to protect them. "Can I tell you something?" Shaq finally said. "Yeah. I got a phone call this morning." Terrell looked up. Something in Shaq's voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but underneath it, something cold, something sharp. Like stepping into a warm ocean and feeling something brush against your ankle. "From who?" Shaq didn't answer right away. He reached into the bag, found a red gummy bear, held it but didn't eat it, just turned it over in his enormous fingers, studying it like it held instructions. "You remember I told you about my biological father? Joseph Tony? The one who left. The one who left. Yeah. Before I could walk. Before I could talk. Before I could do anything except exist. He looked at me existing and decided that wasn't enough reason to stay." Terrell nodded. He remembered. They had talked about it once. Only once. On the bench in Germany. Shaq had brought it up casually, the way kids bring up their biggest wounds. Like it was nothing. Like it didn't have teeth. "My real dad bounced before I was born. It's whatever." Even at 12, and Terrell knew "it's whatever" meant it's everything. "He called me this morning," Shaq said. Terrell's breath caught. "Joseph Tony called you?" 6 in the morning. I was in bed. Lucille was at the house helping me unpack. You know, I just moved here from LA. My phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. But you did." "I did." Shaq put the gummy bear in his mouth, chewed slowly, swallowed, like he was buying time. Like the next words were heavy, and he needed to build a runway long enough to land them. He said 6 words, that's it. 6 words, and then the line went dead. Either he hung up or the call dropped. I don't know. 6 words. What did he say? Shaq closed his eyes. The lids were heavy, the lashes long. behind those closed eyes. But a 32-year-old man was hearing his father's voice for the first time since infancy. A voice he had no memory of. A voice that should have been the first sound he learned to trust, and instead was the first silence he learned to survive. He opened his eyes. He said. Shaq stopped. His jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek flexed. His hands that had palmed basketballs and lifted trophies and written $62 million checks without trembling. His hands were shaking. He said, "I'm dying. I needed your voice." The tarmac went silent. Not the peaceful kind of silent. The kind that follows an explosion. The kind that means the world has absorbed something it doesn't know how to process. Terrell stared at Shaq. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide behind his wire-rimmed glasses. 6 words. And I'm dying. I needed your voice. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Not, "Can you forgive me?" Not even, "I love you." Just, "I'm dying. And I needed to hear you." As if hearing was the same as knowing. As if a voice on the phone could replace 32 years of silence. As if calling a man son in the last chapter of your life earns you a title you abandoned in the first. "What did you do?" Terrell asked. His voice was barely there. A thread. Shaq looked at him. And the expression on Shaq's face was one that Terrell had never seen before. Not on TV. Not in interviews. Not in any of the thousands of hours of footage that existed of this man. It was shame. "I hung up," Shaq said. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward in every direction. "I hung up on my dying father, Terrell." And I heard the word dying, and I pressed the red button, and I threw the phone on the bed, and I stood in my kitchen for 45 minutes without moving. Just stood there, like a statue. Like, if I didn't move, maybe it didn't happen. Maybe the phone didn't ring. Maybe I didn't hear his voice. Maybe I don't have a father dying in Newark while I'm standing in a mansion in Miami with more money than he'll ever see. He stopped. Breathed. The breath shuddered on the way in, like a car driving over a rough road. And then I got in my car and I drove here, to this place. Because I don't know what I needed. I needed someone to underestimate me so I could prove them wrong. Because proving people wrong is the only thing that makes me feel powerful. And I needed to feel powerful because that phone call made me feel like a little kid again. A little kid who wasn't enough. Terrell didn't say anything for a long time. The gummy bears sat between them in the crumpled bag. The sun was lower now. The sky was starting to blush at the edges, pink and orange, and the faintest shade of purple, like a bruise healing in real time. "That lady didn't do anything to you," Terrell finally said. Quietly, carefully. The way you touch a wound that's still bleeding. She was just standing in the wrong place, at the wrong time. "I know," Shaq said. "That's why I didn't buy the jets." Another silence. But this one was different. This one had understanding in it. This one had 2 men sitting in the wreckage of their own armor, looking at each other without masks for the first time in 19 years. "You gotta call him back," Terrell said. Shaq shook his head. "I can't." "You can. You just don't want to." "He left me, Terrell. He left me before I could even say his name. He doesn't get to call me son now. He doesn't get my voice. He doesn't deserve it." "Maybe not, but you deserve to give it." Shaq looked at Terrell like he'd been slapped. But not the angry kind of slapped. The kind that wakes you up. The kind that says, "Pay attention. This is the truest thing you'll hear today." "You just told me," Terrell continued, "that you hung up and felt like a kid again. Like you weren't enough. But you know what I heard? I heard a man who's so powerful that one phone call from a stranger can rearrange his whole day, make him drive across Miami, make him write a check for $62 million, make him teach a lesson to a woman he never met. So all because a voice on the phone reminded him of a wound he's been running from his whole life. Terrell leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his glasses catching the last of the sunlight. That's not weakness, Shaq. That's a wound that needs closing. And the only person who can close it is you. Not your money, not your fame, not a check. You. Shaq stared at his friend. This man in a suit who sounded nothing like the boy from the bench, and yet sounded exactly like him. Because the words were the same, the wisdom was the same. The ability to look at Shaq and see past the armor and the size and the fame and find the kid underneath. That was Terrell. That had always been Terrell. "When did you get so smart?" Shaq asked. His voice was thick. His eyes were wet. "I was always smart. I told you, judging is free. Understanding takes effort." "You said that when you were 12. And I was right when I was 12. Terrell paused, looked down at his hands, at his suit, at the tie that cost $300 and suddenly felt like a costume. "I'm just wrong now because I forgot." Shaq reached into the bag, pulled out 2 red gummy bears, handed one to Terrell. They held them up. 2 red bears, 2 men, 2 boys. One bench in Germany stretching across 20 years and 6,000 miles to touch this moment on a tarmac in Miami. "To not forgetting," Terrell said. "To not forgetting," Shaq said. They ate the bears at the same time. And something between them, something that had been frayed and stretched and tested by distance and time and silence, pulled tight again, not like new, better than new. Because rope that breaks and gets retied is stronger at the knot than it ever was when it was whole. The sky turned orange, then pink, then the softest, deepest blue, the color of a bruise that's almost healed, the color of something that hurt once but won't hurt forever. And Shaq, sitting in a $9 folding chair next to a $60 million jet, holding a crumpled bag of candy that cost $1.50. Shaq made a decision. He was going to call Joseph Tony back. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, before it was too late. Because Terrell was right. The wound needed closing, and checks can buy fleets, but they can't buy closure. Only courage can do that. Only showing up. Only saying the thing that scares you most and letting it exist in the air between you and another person. Only voice. And Shaq's voice. The slang. You're the yo. The you feel me. The laugh that rattled buildings. The whisper that named a friend on a hot tarmac. His voice was the most valuable thing he owned. It always had been. Some days are just days. You wake up. You drink your coffee. You go through the motions. You go to sleep. Nothing shifts. Nothing breaks. Nothing blooms. The world is the same at midnight as it was at dawn. And then there are days like this one. Days that reach inside you and rearrange the furniture. Days that take the version of yourself you've been carrying around like a suitcase and unpack it right there on the floor and say, "Look at all this stuff you've been dragging. Do you even need half of it?" July 2004. A Tuesday in Miami. A day that changed 4 lives. Not 2, not 3, 4. Here's what happened to each of them. Margot Elliston drove home that evening in her silver Lexus. The same car she drove every day. The same route. I-95 south to the Palmetto Expressway. Exit at Kendall. Left on 88th Street. right into the driveway of the three-bedroom house she had bought with the commissions from selling jets to people who looked the way she expected rich people to look. But she didn't pull into the garage. She parked in the driveway, turned the engine off, sat there. The sun was almost gone. The sky above her neighborhood was the color of a peach, soft, warm, fading. Sprinklers whispered on lawns. A dog barked 3 houses down. A child laughed somewhere. Normal sounds, Tuesday sounds. The sounds of a world that didn't know what had happened in a marble lobby that afternoon. Margot sat in her car for 22 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the dashboard change. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. She was in the place that comes after crying. The quiet, clear, open space where you can finally see yourself without the fog of emotion blurring the edges. She saw herself clearly for the first time in years. She saw the blazer, the glasses on the chain, the polished nails, the measured words, the careful, calculated way she sorted people into categories the moment they walked through her door. She saw the invisible checklist she ran: shoes, watch, vocabulary, posture, skin. Before she decided whether someone deserved the showroom floor or the charter brochure, she saw Gerald Whitfield, the loan officer, the gray mustache, the word sweetheart, the sundress, and the way he looked at 26-year-old Margot like she was a child who had wandered into the wrong building. And she saw, finally, fully, painfully, that she had become him. Not all at once, not on purpose, not through malice or cruelty, but through the slow, quiet erosion of empathy that happens when you let one bad experience teach you the wrong lesson. Gerald taught her that the world judges by appearances, and instead of fighting that truth, she had weaponized it. She had taken the tool that was used to hurt her and turned it on others. She went inside. She ate dinner, leftover pasta, cold, standing at the kitchen counter. She didn't taste it. She was thinking. At 9 o'clock that night, she sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. She opened a blank document. She typed for 45 minutes. When she was done, she printed 2 copies. The first copy was a new greeting policy for Fontaine Executive Aviation. It was simple. 1 page, 5 rules. 1. Every person who enters this lobby will be greeted with the same words, the same warmth, and the same respect, regardless of their appearance. 2. No assumptions will be made about a client's financial capacity based on clothing, speech, age, race, or any other external factor. 3. The charter brochure will not be offered as a default. Every client will be shown the full range of options and allowed to self-select. 4. If a team member is uncertain about a client's needs, the correct response is to ask, not to assume. 5. This policy is not optional. She signed it, dated it, drove to the office at 6 the next morning and taped it to the break room wall, right above the coffee machine where every employee would see it before their first sip. Vincent Trudeau, her boss, arrived at 8. He read the policy. He looked at Margot. He didn't ask why. Maybe he already knew. Maybe the news had reached him. A phone call from Rosalind. A mention from a security guard. The whisper network that exists in every small company where something extraordinary happens and nobody can keep quiet about it. Vincent nodded once. The same kind of nod Philip Harrison used to give Shaq. The kind that means more than applause. "Good," he said. "Should have done this years ago." 3 months later, a young woman walked into Fontaine Executive Aviation. She was 26 years old. She was wearing ripped jeans, a gray hoodie with a coffee stain on the sleeve, and sneakers that looked like they had run a marathon through a mud pit. Her hair was in a messy bun. She had no makeup on. She looked like a college student who had wandered in from the wrong parking lot. Her name was Priya Chandrasekhar. She was from Coral Gables. She was a software engineer who had started a cybersecurity company in her apartment 2 years earlier. 3 weeks ago, that company had been acquired by a tech conglomerate for $90 million. Priya was now one of the wealthiest 26-year-olds in South Florida. And she was wearing a hoodie. Margot greeted her at the counter. Same words, same warmth, same respect. "Welcome to Fontaine. I'm Margot. How can I help you today?" Not, "Can I help you? Sweetie?" Not, "Are you lost?" Not, "Maybe you'd like a brochure for something more suitable." Just, "How can I help you?" Priya smiled. "I want to buy a jet. Something fast. I've got meetings in San Francisco every other week, and I'm tired of commercial airlines losing my luggage." Margot smiled back. "Let me show you the Citation X. I think you're going to love it." Priya bought the Citation X that afternoon. She paid in full. She flew it to San Francisco 3 days later. And before she left, she shook Margot's hand and said, "Thank you for not being weird about the hoodie. The last dealership I went to asked if I was someone's assistant." Margot held that handshake for an extra second. "I used to be that person," she said. "I'm not anymore." Years later, 2011, Margot stood on a stage at an aviation industry conference in Las Vegas. A room full of salespeople, brokers, executives, and dealership owners. 500 people in suits and ties and polished shoes. She wore a blazer. She always wore a blazer. Some things you keep because they're yours, not because the world demands them. She told the story, not all of it. Not the gummy bears or the tarmac or the phone call, just the lobby part, the check, the lesson. She never said Shaq's name. She called him the tallest teacher I ever had. The room laughed. Then it went quiet. Then, one by one, 500 people in suits started clapping. Not the polite kind of clapping, the kind that starts slow and builds. The kind that sounds like rain on a roof, getting heavier and heavier until it's a storm. Margot stood in that storm and felt something she hadn't felt since she was a girl watching her father walk through the front door in his pilot's uniform. Pride. But this time, it was her own. Rosaline Asante went home that evening to her apartment in Opa-locka. It was a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building that had good bones but bad plumbing. The hallway always smelled like somebody's dinner. The parking lot had 3 potholes that never got fixed. The elevator hadn't worked since February. She climbed the stairs, unlocked her door, fed her cat, a gray tabby named Thrust, because Rosalind named everything after engine parts. She had a cactus on the windowsill named Piston, a goldfish that died last year named Torque. She sat on her couch and stared at the ceiling. She was thinking about the 2 men on the tarmac, the big one and the suited one. The way they hugged. The way the big one lifted the suited one right off the ground like he weighed nothing. The way they sat in those folding chairs, her chairs, the ones she carried out, and talked for hours while the sun set behind them. She didn't know their history. She didn't need to. She saw 2 men being human with each other. Open, vulnerable, present, and that was enough. But she was also thinking about something else. Something that had been sitting in the back of her mind for 2 years, gathering dust like a tool she was afraid to pick up. Her airframe and power plant certification upgrade. Rosalind was already a licensed aircraft mechanic. She had her basic A&P certificate. But the upgrade, the advanced certification that would let her sign off on major repairs, lead maintenance crews, they eventually run her own operation. That was a different level. It required additional coursework, additional testing, additional everything. Her supervisor at Fontaine, a man named Derek Hollis, had told her 2 years ago that the upgrade was probably not worth pursuing. He said it casually, over lunch, while eating a turkey sandwich, like he was commenting on the weather instead of capping the ceiling of her career. The failure rate is high, Rosalind. The test is brutal. Most people don't pass the first time. Save yourself the stress. She heard what he said, but she also heard what he didn't say. She heard the subtext that lived underneath his words, like a foundation under a house. Invisible, but load-bearing. You're a woman. You're black. You're an immigrant's daughter. Be grateful for what you have. Don't reach for more. She had listened. She had stayed in her lane. She had kept her head down and her hands busy and her ambitions small enough to fit inside a box that Derek Hollis was comfortable with. Until today. Today, she watched a man in flip-flops write a check for $62 million because someone told him he couldn't afford what he could clearly afford. Today, she watched that same man teach a lesson without raising his voice. Today, she carried 2 folding chairs to a tarmac and created a space where something broken got mended. And she thought, if he can do that, what am I so afraid of? The next Monday, she walked into Derek's office. She was still wearing her work coveralls. Her hands still had grease under the nails. She smelled like jet fuel, which, to her, smelled like purpose. "I'm taking the upgrade exam," she said. Not asking, I'm telling. Derek looked up from his computer. "I told you, Rosalind, the pass rate is—" "I heard you the first time. I'm taking it anyway." She studied for 4 months, every night after work. Textbooks spread across her kitchen table. Thrust the cat sleeping on a stack of engine schematics. Flashcards taped to the bathroom mirror so she could quiz herself while brushing her teeth. She took the exam on a Saturday morning in November 2004. The testing center was in a strip mall between a Subway sandwich shop and a nail salon. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The chairs were uncomfortable. The proctor looked bored. Rosalind wasn't bored. Rosalind was on fire. She passed. Not just passed. She scored the highest in her testing center. The proctor looked at her results, looked at her, looked at the results again, and said, "These are exceptional scores." She didn't say, "Thank you." She said, "I know." Because Rosaline Asante was done being surprised by her own excellence. She was done letting other people's low expectations become her ceiling. She was done being the best mechanic in the hangar while letting a man with a turkey sandwich tell her she wasn't ready for more. By 2009, Rosalind was running maintenance operations for Coastal Elite Aviation in Fort Lauderdale. She had a team of 12 mechanics under her. She hired based on skill, not appearance. She promoted based on results, not comfort. 3 of her mechanics were women. 2 were immigrants. One was a 19-year-old kid from Liberty City who spoke in slang so thick that half the office couldn't understand him. He was the best engine diagnostic specialist she had ever seen. She never corrected his speech. Not once. In 2007, Rosalind had a daughter. She was born on a Tuesday, the same day of the week as the lobby. Rosalind held this tiny, perfect, screaming human in her arms and chose a name, Shaquille. Not because of basketball, not because of fame, because of what the name means. Little warrior. "That's what you are," she whispered to her daughter in the delivery room, while Thrust the cat sat at home on the windowsill, unaware that his owner's life had just changed forever. "You're a little warrior, and nobody gets to tell you what you can't afford to become." Terrell Okafor flew back to Atlanta the next morning. The flight was commercial, Delta. Not business class this time. He had booked business class out of habit, but when he got to the gate, he walked up to the counter and asked to switch to coach. The gate agent looked confused. "You want to downgrade, sir?" "Yeah, middle seat is fine." She shrugged, printed a new boarding pass. Terrell took it and walked down the jetway and found his seat. 24B, middle row, between a teenager with headphones and an elderly woman with a crossword puzzle. He sat down. He buckled his seatbelt. And then he did something he hadn't done since he was 13 years old. Standing on a sidewalk in Wild Flecken, watching Shaq wave goodbye. He took off his tie. It was a silk Hermes tie, navy blue with small gold diamonds. It cost $320. He had bought it at Lenox Square Mall in Atlanta to celebrate his promotion to senior analyst. He wore it every Tuesday and Thursday, his power tie days, and the days when he had important meetings and needed to look the part. He folded it once, twice, 3 times. Neat, careful folds. The same way Shaq had folded the check in the lobby. He placed it in his briefcase, closed the latch. Then he unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. And the second one. He leaned back. The headrest was thin and smelled like recycled air. The teenager next to him was bobbing his head to music that leaked faintly from his headphones. Something with bass, something with rhythm, something young and alive. A flight attendant came by with the drink cart. She was smiling, tired but smiling. The kind of smile that gets you through a 12-hour shift at 30,000 feet. "What can I get you, sir?" And here's where 19 years of performance met one afternoon of truth. Terrell opened his mouth. And the old version of him, the Greystone Capital version, the Buckhead version, the version that had been rehearsed and polished and approved by every boardroom in Atlanta, that version would have said, "Water would be lovely, thank you." But that version had taken off his tie. That version was sitting in coach. That version had eaten gummy bears on a tarmac with a man who never changed his voice and was better for it. "Yo, can I get a ginger ale?" 3 words in his own voice. 3 words that sounded like a kid from a military base in Germany. 3 words that didn't belong in a performance review or a client presentation or a networking cocktail hour. 3 words that sounded like home. The flight attendant smiled. "Absolutely. Ice?" "Yeah, thanks." She poured the ginger ale, handed it to him. No flinch, no raised eyebrow, and no invisible evaluation. Just a drink, handed to a man on a plane, like it was nothing. Because it was nothing. To her, to Terrell, it was everything. He sipped the ginger ale. It was cold and sharp and sweet. It tasted like the first honest thing he had consumed in years. The elderly woman next to him glanced over. She was working on 14 across. She had kind eyes and a pen instead of a pencil. The confidence of a woman who didn't believe in erasing. "Long trip?" she asked. "Nah," Terrell said. "I'm just coming home." She smiled like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she had her own version of a tie she'd taken off once. Maybe everybody does. Over the next year, Terrell slowly let himself come back. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was more like a thaw. Ice melting 1 degree at a time until what was frozen becomes flowing. Oh, he stopped code switching in meetings. He used the words that came naturally instead of the words that came strategically. He said, "for real," in a quarterly review. He said, "that's fire," when a junior analyst presented a brilliant risk model. He said, "yo," to a client on the phone, and the client laughed and said "yo" back. He lost 1 promotion. His managing director, a man named Charles Wren, told him in a closed-door meeting that his communication style had shifted, and it was raising concerns among senior leadership. "What concerns?" Terrell asked. "Just tone? Professionalism? You understand?" Terrell understood perfectly. He understood that professionalism was a word that sometimes meant excellence and sometimes meant erasure, and the difference depended entirely on who was saying it and who they were saying it to. But he didn't fight the decision. He didn't file a complaint. He didn't adjust his tone back to the approved frequency. He just kept being Terrell, the real one, the one who had been locked in a back office for 19 years and was finally standing in the doorway, blinking in the sunlight. 6 months later, he left Greystone Capital. He joined a smaller firm, Black-owned, based in Midtown Atlanta, founded by a woman named Jacqueline Baptiste, who had been told by 3 different banks that her business model was too ambitious before she found one that said, "Tell me more." Jacqueline hired Terrell in 15 minutes. "You know your stuff," she said, "and you sound like somebody I'd actually want to grab lunch with. That matters more than you think." Terrell made less money at the new firm. His condo in Buckhead became an apartment in West End. His BMW became a Honda. His wardrobe shifted from Hermes to Banana Republic. He had never been happier, and he and Shaq stayed in touch. Phone calls every few weeks, sometimes short. "Yo, you see the game last night?" Sometimes long, 2 men in their 30s talking about fathers and fear and what it means to be yourself in a world that keeps handing you a script and asking you to read it. They mailed gummy bears back and forth, red ones only. It became a running joke that wasn't really a joke. It was a ritual, a sacrament, a $2 bag of candy that said, "I remember you. I remember us. I remember the bench." When Shaq retired from the NBA in June 2011, after a final season with the Boston Celtics, Terrell was in the stands at TD Garden. He was wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and no tie. He watched his friend walk off the court for the last time. He stood up and clapped until his palms burned. When Terrell got married in 2013 to a woman named Amara Obi, a pediatrician from Silver Spring, Maryland, who fell in love with him specifically because he sounded like himself, Shaq was his best man. Shaq gave the toast. 8 minutes long, unfiltered, unscripted, full of slang and jokes and impressions, and one moment, right near the end, where his voice cracked and he said, "This man right here taught me the most important thing I ever learned. He told me when we were 12 years old that judging is free, but understanding takes effort." And he was right. And I spent my whole life trying to live up to that. So, Terrell, bro, thank you for being smart before any of us were ready for it. 200 people in that ballroom laughed and cried at the same time. Nobody asked Shaq to tone it down. Nobody offered him a brochure for a more suitable toast. Nobody suggested he speak differently. Because every person in that room, from Amara's grandmother to Terrell's co-workers to the bartender working the open bar, could hear the truth in his voice. And truth doesn't need a dress code. February 2006. 20 months after the lobby. Miami was doing what Miami does in February, pretending that winter doesn't exist. The rest of the country was buried under coats and scarves and gray skies that pressed down on people's heads like ceilings made of sadness. But Miami was 74 degrees, blue sky, palm trees swaying like they were showing off. They're the kind of weather that makes you forget that hard things exist. Shaq couldn't forget. He was in his 2nd season with the Miami Heat. The team was good, really good. Dwyane Wade was playing like a man possessed, all speed and angles and fearlessness. The kind of player who makes everyone around him better just by existing on the same court. The Heat were building towards something special, something historic. In 4 months, Shaq and Wade would win the NBA championship. Shaq's 4th ring, Wade's 1st. The city of Miami would explode with joy. Confetti would fall like colored snow. A parade would stretch down Biscayne Boulevard. Shaq would ride on a float and wave at 1 million people, and smile the big smile and wear the armor and be exactly who the world expected him to be. But that was 4 months away. Right now, it was a Thursday night, 11:15. The house was quiet. Shaq's Miami home was enormous. 8 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, a swimming pool shaped like a basketball shoe, because of course it was, a home theater with seats bigger than most people's couches, a kitchen with 2 refrigerators, one of which was dedicated entirely to snacks, a garage with enough cars to start a small dealership. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, the house felt empty. Not because nobody was in it, because Shaq was in it. And Shaq felt empty. He was sitting in the kitchen. The same kitchen where he had stood frozen for 45 minutes after Joseph Tony's phone call 20 months ago. The same tile floor, the same granite countertops, the same window that looked out on the pool, which glowed turquoise in the dark, like a giant sleeping eye. His phone was on the counter, next to a glass of water he hadn't touched, next to a bag of Haribo gummy bears he hadn't opened, next to a folded piece of paper he hadn't looked at in months, but carried with him everywhere. The check. $62 million. Made out to Fontaine Executive Aviation. Signed in his own handwriting. Never cashed. Never intended to be cashed. Folded into a small square and kept in the pocket of whatever he was wearing. Shorts, sweats, suit pants. It didn't matter. The check traveled with him like a talisman, like a prayer written in zeros. He didn't keep it because of the money. He kept it because of what it represented. The moment he proved he was enough. The moment the world underestimated him, and he responded not with anger, but with quiet, devastating proof. But tonight, the check felt different in his hands. Tonight, it didn't feel like proof. It felt like a bandage on a wound that was still bleeding underneath. Because Terrell was right. Terrell was right 20 months ago on that tarmac, eating gummy bears in a folding chair, sweating through a suit he no longer wanted to wear. The only person who can close this wound is you. Not your money, not your fame, not a check. You? Shaq had been thinking about those words every day since. Not constantly, not obsessively, but the way you think about a rock in your shoe. It's always there, you learn to walk with it, but every few steps it shifts, and you feel it again, and you remember that it doesn't belong there. He had talked about it with Dr. Celeste Woodard. 3 sessions, maybe 4. She didn't tell him what to do. She never told him what to do. She asked questions instead. Questions that were simple on the surface but had basements and sub-basements underneath them. What are you afraid will happen if you call him back? I don't know. That he'll ask for money. Is that really what you're afraid of? Silence. No. What then? Longer silence. That he'll sound like a regular person. That he'll sound tired and old and sick. And that I'll feel sorry for him. And if I feel sorry for him, I'll have to forgive him. And if I forgive him, then all those years of being angry were for nothing. And the anger is load-bearing, Doc. You understand? Take the anger out, and I don't know what holds the rest of me up. Dr. Woodard let that sit for a long time. The clock on her wall ticked. The leather chair creaked. The room smelled like lavender and honesty. Shaquille, she finally said, What if the anger isn't holding you up? What if it's holding you down? He didn't answer. He couldn't, because the question was too true and too terrifying and too close to the thing he had been running from since he was 2 years old, and a man named Joseph Tony decided that being a father was something you could put down, like a bag of groceries, like a set of keys, like it was nothing. But tonight, February 2006, 11:15, on a Thursday, kitchen, quiet house, turquoise pool, untouched water, unopened gummy bears. Tonight, Shaq was done running. He picked up the phone. He dialed a number, the same number from 20 months ago. He had never deleted it. It sat in his call log like a door he hadn't opened, like a letter he hadn't read, like a question he hadn't answered. The phone rang. Once. His hand was steady, steadier than he expected. The hand that had written a $62 million check without trembling was now dialing a number that cost nothing and weighed more than every dollar he had ever earned. Twice. He thought about Lucille, his mother, the woman who worked double shifts and packed lunches with notes that said, "I believe in you." She had never spoken badly about Joseph, not once. When young Shaq asked about his biological father, Lucille would say the same thing every time. "He's got his own journey, baby. Ours is right here." 3 times. He thought about Philip, the stepfather, the sergeant, the man who didn't have to stay but stayed anyway, who didn't have to love but loved anyway, who showed Shaq, through push-ups and car rides and that single nod at the NBA draft, that fatherhood isn't about blood. It's about showing up, over and over, especially when it's hard, especially when nobody's watching, especially when the kid isn't yours by birth but becomes yours by choice. 4 times. He thought about Terrell, the bench, the gummy bears, the words that a 12-year-old boy said on a gray German afternoon that turned out to be the truest thing anyone had ever told him. Judging is free. Understanding takes effort. A click. The ringing stopped. A voice answered. Older than Shaq remembered. Thinner. Like paper that's been folded too many times. Like wind through a cracked window. Like the last note of a song that nobody else is listening to. "Hello?" Shaq closed his eyes. His lids were heavy. Behind them, he saw everything at once. The lobby, the check, the tarmac, the folding chairs, the gummy bears, the bench, the base, see the apartment in Newark where he was born, the door that Joseph walked out of 34 years ago. It's Shaquille. Silence on the other end. Not an empty silence, a full one. The kind that has a heartbeat. The kind that has tears in it that you can hear even though they make no sound. "I'm not calling because I forgive you." He said it clearly, not with cruelty, not with anger, with the calm, measured honesty of a man who has sat in enough therapy sessions and eaten enough gummy bears and written enough uncashed checks to know the difference between punishment and truth. "I'm calling because I'm tired of carrying you around. You're heavy, man. You've been heavy my whole life, and I need to put you down." The silence on the other end stretched like a rubber band pulled to its limit. Shaq could hear breathing, shallow, labored, and the breathing of a man whose heart was failing, the breathing of a man who was running out of time. When Joseph Tony finally spoke, his voice cracked. Not a small crack. The kind that splits a word in half and lets everything behind it spill out. "I don't deserve a phone call from you." "No," Shaq said, "you don't. I know I don't. But this call isn't for you. It's for me." Another silence. Shaq could hear something in the background. A television, maybe. Low volume. Canned laughter from a sitcom. The sound of someone else's happiness playing in a room where happiness had probably been scarce for a long time. "I'm sick, Shaquille." "I know. You told me. 20 months ago." "Stage 4. Heart failure. The doctors say..." "I don't need to hear the medical part. I heard you the first time. I heard you say you were dying and I hung up on you. And I've spent 20 months thinking about that. 20 months carrying the weight of being the kind of man who hangs up on his dying father." He paused, breathed. The breath was shaky going in and steady coming out, like a wave that breaks rough but reaches the shore smooth. "I'm not going to pretend we have a relationship. We don't. You're not my father. Philip Harrison is my father. He earned that. Every day, every push-up, every car ride, every time he showed up when you didn't. He's my father. That's not changing." Joseph didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't offer excuses. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe he was too honest. Maybe, at the end of a life defined by leaving, he had finally run out of exits. "But I'm not going to let you die alone," Shaq said. The words came out before he could second-guess them, before the anger could intercept them, before the wound could scream he doesn't deserve this loud enough to drown out the quieter voice underneath. The voice that said, "But you deserve to give it." Terrell's voice, on the tarmac, in the folding chair, with the gummy bears. "You deserve to give it." "I don't know how to be your son," Shaq continued. "I never learned that. You didn't teach me, but I know how to show up. Philip taught me that. And I'm going to show up." A sound came through the phone. Not a word. Not a sob. Something in between. Something that doesn't have a name in any language because it belongs to a category of human experience that is too raw, too private, too sacred for vocabulary. And the sound of a man who left everything and now had nothing and was being offered something he hadn't earned by the person he had hurt the most. "You don't have to do that," Joseph whispered. "I know. That's why I'm doing it. Because I don't have to. Because Philip taught me that you don't show up because you have to. You show up because that's who you are." The phone call lasted 4 more minutes. They didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. 34 years of silence can't be filled in one conversation. It probably can't be filled in 100. But the door was open now. For the first time, the door was open. Before he hung up, Shaq said one more thing. "Joseph." "Yeah?" "I heard you, 20 months ago. When you said you needed my voice, I heard you. I just wasn't ready. And now? Now I'm ready." The call ended. Shaq put the phone down on the granite counter. He looked at the glass of water. He picked it up and drank the whole thing in one long swallow. He opened the bag of gummy bears, ate a red one, then another, then a third. He unfolded the check, looked at it. $62 million. His own handwriting, his own name, his own proof that he was enough. He folded it back up, put it in his pocket. He would keep carrying it. Not because he still needed to prove anything, but because it reminded him of a Tuesday in July when his whole life cracked open and began to heal. Joseph Toney passed away later that year, September 2006. A small hospital in Newark, New Jersey. The same city where Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born 34 years earlier. The room was small, the bed was narrow, and the machines beeped in rhythms that sounded like countdown clocks. The window looked out on a parking lot, where a man in a blue jacket was walking a dog. Normal things, Tuesday things. The world doing what the world does while someone inside a room is leaving it. Shaq was there. He flew in from Miami 2 days before the end. He didn't tell anyone. Not his agent. Not his publicist. Not the media. This wasn't for cameras. This wasn't for headlines. This was for the stone in his chest that had been there for 34 years and was finally, slowly, painfully dissolving. He sat in a plastic chair next to the bed. The chair was too small for him. Everything was too small for him. His knees pressed against the bed frame. His shoulders spilled over the armrests. He looked like a giant sitting in a dollhouse. Joseph was thin, so thin. Or the body in the bed looked nothing like the image Shaq had carried in his mind all these years. The phantom father, the towering absence, the man whose shadow loomed large enough to darken an entire childhood. This man was small, fragile, human. They didn't talk much. There wasn't time. Joseph drifted in and out. Sometimes he was present, eyes open, breathing steady, a faint awareness in his gaze. Sometimes he was somewhere else, a place the living can't follow, a room before the room, a hallway between here and gone. During one of the present moments, Joseph looked at Shaq, really looked at him. The way you look at something you're seeing for the last time. "You got big," he said. His voice was a thread. Shaq almost laughed. Almost, as the laugh started somewhere deep in his chest and rose halfway to his throat, and then turned into something else, something wet and heavy that he swallowed back down. "Yeah," he said, "I got big. Your mama did good. She did. And Philip." "Yeah, and Philip." Joseph nodded. The nod cost him visible effort, like even that small movement was being taxed by a body that had almost nothing left to give. "I'm sorry, Shaquille." There it was, the sentence that Shaq had spent 34 years waiting to hear. 2 words, 5 syllables. The simplest, most inadequate, most necessary words in the human language. "I'm sorry." Not, "I'm sorry I left." Not, "I'm sorry I missed everything." Not, "I'm sorry I called you 20 months ago and said 6 words and expected that to be enough." Just, "I'm sorry." Unqualified, unexplained, laid on the bed between them like a stone taken from one chest and offered to another. Shaq looked at this man, this stranger, this ghost who had haunted every achievement, every failure, every lobby, every check, every moment of his life. And he said, "I know." Not, "I forgive you." Not, "It's okay." Not, "I understand." Because it wasn't okay. And he didn't fully understand. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, the kind that goes all the way down, might take years, might take decades, might take forever. But "I know" was enough. For now, for this room, for this moment. "I know" meant I hear you. I believe you mean it. And I'm here, which is more than you ever gave me. But I'm giving it to you anyway. Because that's who I am. Because that's who Lucille raised. Because that's who Philip built. Because a boy on a bench in Germany told me once that understanding takes effort. And I've been trying to live up to that ever since. Joseph Tony closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. The machines beeped their quiet countdown. Shaq stayed. He stayed through the night. He stayed through the shift change when a nurse named Claudette came in and checked the IV and looked at this enormous man folded into a plastic chair and didn't ask who he was. She just brought him a cup of coffee and a blanket and left without a word. Because some things explain themselves. He stayed through the sunrise, through the parking lot filling with cars, through the sound of the hospital waking up, footsteps, carts, voices, the machinery of caring for people who are leaving. Joseph Tony passed at 7:42 in the morning. A Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. On the day of the week that kept showing up in this story like a thread woven through a quilt. The day Terrell left Germany. The day in the lobby. The day Rosalind's daughter was born. And now, this. Tuesday. The day things change. Shaq was holding his hand, not because Joseph earned it, not because the story required it, not because holding a dying man's hand erases 34 years of absence, because Shaq showed up. That's what he does. That's who Philip taught him to be. That's the man Lucille raised. That's the friend Terrell believed in. That's the lesson the lobby taught him. Not that money is power, but that presence is. He didn't speak at the funeral. It was small. A chapel in Newark. 12 people. Shaq didn't know any of them. He stood in the back row, the biggest person in the room, trying to make himself small enough to grieve privately. Trying to be invisible, which, for a 7'1" man, is a special kind of impossible. Nobody approached him. Nobody asked for an autograph. Nobody took a photo. Maybe they didn't recognize him. Maybe they did, and understood that this wasn't the time. Maybe grace exists in small chapels in Newark on quiet Tuesday mornings when the world isn't watching. And in his pocket, folded into a tiny square, pressed against his thigh like a heartbeat made of paper, was the check. $62 million. He never cashed it. He never intended to cash it. It was never about the money. It was always about the voice. His voice. The slang and the yo and the you feel me, and the laugh that could fill a lobby or a tarmac, or a chapel, or a hospital room. So it was always about proving, to the woman at the counter, to the father who left, to the world that judges before it understands, that you cannot measure a person's worth by the words they use, or the shoes they wear, or the clothes on their back, or the accent in their mouth. Some people wear flip-flops and carry checkbooks that could buy the sky. Some people speak in slang and hold doctoral degrees. Some people get left behind and still choose to show up. Some people lose their voice and spend 19 years finding it again over a ginger ale on a coach class flight. Some people carry folding chairs to a tarmac and create space for two strangers to become brothers again. Some people tape a new policy to a break room wall and change the way an entire company treats the next person who walks through the door. But some people name their daughter after a word that means little warrior, and raise her to believe that nobody gets to tell her what she can't afford to become. That's the real story of the Jet Lobby. Not the check, not the fleet, not the slang. The story is about a Tuesday in Miami, when 4 strangers stood in the same building and walked out as different people. When a man wrote a number so large, it made a woman rethink her life. When a friend heard a voice he'd been missing for 19 years and remembered who he used to be. When a mechanic carried 2 chairs into the sun and decided she was done being small. The story is about the weight we carry, the armor we wear, the voices we silence, the people we judge, the people we become when we stop pretending and start being. Dinand at the center of it all, standing 7'1" in basketball shorts and flip-flops, holding a bag of gummy bears and a folded check and a heart so big it barely fit inside his chest, was Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal, Little Warrior, who learned that the greatest power isn't buying everything in the room. It's walking in as yourself and refusing to leave as anyone else. And that's the story of a man who walked into a room in flip-flops and walked out having changed 4 lives forever, including his own. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now. Whether it's Lagos or London, Miami or Mumbai, Texas or Tokyo. Let me know. Because this community stretches across the whole world, and every single one of you matters. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you to never judge someone before you know their story, hit that like button. It's free. It takes 1 second. and it helps this video reach someone out there who might need to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and turn on that bell so you never miss a story like this again. Every time you subscribe, every time you share, every time you send this video to a friend or a family member, you're spreading a little more kindness into the world. And the world could always use more of that. Now click on the video appearing on your screen right now, because that story might hit even harder than this one. I'll see you there.